details tonight on a twist in the search for a couple missing in the outback.
Jennie Kehlet went missing in the Goldfields near Sandstone. Her husband Raymond was found at the bottom of a 12-metre abandoned mine shaft, but Jennie had disappeared.
Any progress is good progress, and obviously the police have been busy with this in the background. Hopefully something comes of it.
At this point in time, we're not seeing anything that suggests criminality.
Are you serious?
Yes.
We've only got one side of the story.
We find Jennie, we will find out what happened.
It just doesn't happen out here. It's not normal behaviour.
Did you deliberately mislead the police about where you went with Ray and Jennie in Sandstone in March 2015?
No.
It's not like them. They're experienced. They are not lost. Something terrible has happened.
I can hear it like it was yesterday. He actually said that's how you make a lie believable, is it's got a grain of truth.
Welcome to Some Kind of Closure, a podcast series focused on unsolved missing persons cases. Around 38,000 people are reported missing each year in Australia. Thankfully, most of these cases are resolved. In this series, however, we'll be focusing on the small percentage of cases that remain unsolved over several years. We'll explore the complexities and impact on the families involved, who at the end of the day are desperate for some answers and ultimately some kind of closure. Please be aware that this show deals with some distressing themes and may include content and language that some listeners will find distressing. In Season 1 of Some Kind of Closure, we'll be focusing on the perplexing case of missing campers Ray and Jennie Kehlet, who never returned from a prospecting trip they took to a remote region of Western Australia in March of 2015. A decade is a painfully long time to be living with the unknown, and it's my hope that this series will help shine a light on this case and open up conversations that will ultimately lead to some clarity and justice for Ray and Jennie's family. At the end of episode 4, we reached a pivotal moment in the Kehlet case. That was when forensic expert Dr Mark Reynolds formally requested that the investigation be reclassified from a missing persons case to a homicide. That report was a turning point. Mark no longer works for the West Australian Police. He is, however, a globally recognised forensic specialist with a PhD and nearly 30 years' experience investigating homicide and suspicious deaths, and he continues to provide expert advice, case reviews, and advanced forensic training internationally. He's remained in close contact with Ray's brother, Dave Kehlet, offering advice and support as the family continues its search for answers. In this conversation, Mark speaks at length about the evidence he examined, including Ray's injuries, his experience working on the case, and his frustrations with how the investigation was handled over the years. He also speaks candidly about the internal politics of the Department of Public Prosecutions and about police culture more broadly, drawing on experience not only in Australia but internationally. His insights help paint a clearer picture of why this case has been so difficult to resolve, despite the weight of evidence. At the end of the episode, Mark proposes a potential path forward, one that may change how justice is ultimately pursued for Ray and Jennie and for their family. This episode departs from our usual structured format, as Mark had so much to say and spoke with such clarity that we felt this conversation deserved to be released as a standalone episode. We hope you find his insights as compelling as we did.
Yeah, look, my name's Mark Reynolds. Currently, I'm a consultant forensic scientist. Prior to that, I spent almost 30 years in the West Australian Police Service. I went into the forensic division and went into the major crime area. And so, whilst having many roles and responsibilities, I guess the primary one was to ensure that what came out of the WA Police was based on good science. And with regards to the Kehlets, I remember the job came across my desk and I asked for a briefing. And when I got a briefing, it was basically, they're just two missing miners. So the body had not been located at that time. And then my memory was that their dog turned up in the nearest local town. And when I heard about the type of dog it was and its behaviour and its the way it would respond to the Kehlets, for it to have run away, it didn't sit right. Now, people are probably saying you can't start a whole homicide investigation because a dog turns up, but with my experience, it's almost like you name it, I've seen it. And sometimes some of the little subtle things within investigations, little nuances that don't quite sit right, can be the start of the investigation. And so I started following it, and then obviously it got to a point where his remains were found, and we still weren't getting what I thought to be enough traction. Now I had many, let's say, enthusiastic or spirited conversations with members of major crime about, you know, I'm not crying wolf, the fact that there were some features or indicators within it that, look, if you just looked at them in isolation, that they may not add up to a lot, but if you applied a holistic view to them, the holistic value is always greater than the sum of the parts. And so from me and my experience, I was starting to think, you know, this is not looking all that flash. And so that inquiry was progressing, in my opinion, slowly. And so eventually I generated a report, and I put in all the indicators that I felt were not diagnostic, but indicative of criminal offence, and said we need to do something more about this. And the reason for going to paper is you can deny phone calls, you can deny, you know, the context and the content of conversations, but when someone puts it on paper and signs it, passes it up the chain, it's a bit harder to ignore it. So, and then, we progressed along to the point where they finally agreed that, maybe something had gone wrong, and the investigation was ramped up. The thing for me was there was the blood on the boots, there was, the cigarette butts. Those sort of things, like I said, standalone might not mean much. When you start putting them together, they start building a foundation, I think. Look, I think the memo was helpful in reaching that turning point. I'm not sure it was 100% the trigger, but what it certainly did was put major crime on notice. It was just born out of frustration, I guess, in the end, because things that for me appeared quite to make a lot of sense and to be logical and reasonable, my level of thinking was different to major crime. They didn't see my point of view. All the talking to them in the world previously had not changed their position. So I thought, how do I get some traction? How do I actually cause some angst amongst the ranks to get them to do their job? And so I generated that report, and from then on, like I said, things got some traction, and we're where we are today. The three biggest red flags for me is 3 people go in, 1 person comes out. The blood staining and the type of deposition mechanism on his boots, and the 3 cigarette butts within a very short distance from where the body is located. Look, to me, honestly, as a person that's investigated complex homicides for 15 or 20 years, even one of those is a trigger for me. I think part of the lack of response by major crime was naivety. And there's many reasons for that, cultural, the way detectives are transferred within the police service. They build up a certain level of skill set and then they get transferred, And so those were probably the 3. The relevance of the blood on the boot was there was 2 types of deposition. One is called passive drop or drops. Now what that is if you get in a fight at the pub and you get a punch in the nose and blood drips off your nose, the only influence on that blood is gravity, okay? So you get quite distinct and often diagnostic circular type blood stains. Now on the top of one of the boots, you could see that the blood had fallen from above due to the shape of the blood stain. So wherever the boot was, whether it was worn at the time or not, whatever, it was falling from above. And then the other deposition was on the sole of the boot, and these were, these were like safety boot type, mining type boot things. So they had quite a thick sole and quite, I'll use the term, a robust lug pattern. By what I mean by that is, if you have a look at the boot, it's designed to protect the wearer's feet and cushion contact with the ground and that sort of stuff. So there was quite a gap from where the actual bottom of the shoe or the top of the lug, where it comes in contact with the ground, and where the actual sole is. And it was probably, if not half a centimetre, there may be 7 mils. Now, up in those grooves was blood. Now, what that has said to me is that somehow the wearer of the boot has trodden into a pool of blood, and that blood has been forced up into that lug area, either by the volume of blood in the pool or the fact that the surface that was, bloodstained surface that was stood on, was what I'll call yielding or semi-yielding. It was soft. And so what that said to me is quite likely at the time of bloodshed, the person was upright and moving and able to stand in a pool of blood. Now, at the base of the shaft, there was no blood like that ever found. Now, there was a period of time where people have said, it could have got covered or, dried out and not be seen. But my understanding of the examination of the base of the mine shaft, it was quite comprehensive. And the person that did it, I know personally. And if he said to me I had a look and I didn't find it, I would rely on his findings. So for me, I think the blood staining occurred on his boots prior to going down the mine shaft. What stood out was the ambiguity of the evidence, given that he's gone down a mine shaft, and we believe not willingly. And so for me, it was things like there was an area of his jaw that had what I'll call a punched out hole. So when you looked at it, it was relatively neat, almost circular, about 3 or 4 mils across. As soon as I saw it, I thought gunshot. And then people said to me, well, why is there no more damage? And, on the other side of the face and all that sort of stuff. And I said, well, think of the location of where it is. It's the jaw. If the person had been shouting at the time, their mouth's open, the projectile might have gone straight out. And then, so there was that, and there was the damage to the hyoid bone. Very, very rarely do you break a hyoid bone unless it's involved in asphyxial hanging, those sort of things, or strangulation. But it can occur, but it doesn't occur by itself. There's some area of violence there. And for me, the hyoid bone was in an area that it would not typically come into contact if you bounced off the walls as you were going down. Almost semi-protected, for want of a better word. So again, these things by themselves didn't mean a lot, but when you start putting them together, when you get the prime suspect saying he fired off 2 rounds from a gun and there's 2 people missing, now I know that's pretty simple, but for me that's something to talk about. When one of the deceased has what potentially could be a bullet hole in their jaw, and remember I said the person might have been upright and the blood's falling under gravity. If you've got a bleeding injury from your mouth from being shot, you may get blood drops on the top of your boots, which he did. And if you stand in a particular area for long enough, or the blood in some way accumulates from that wound and then you stand in it, that could account for. But this is kind of fitting stuff as we go along. But we're now a fair way down the track and we can fit things, where at the time we didn't really have the knife out of the back. But again, in my head, I felt we had enough to ramp this up. I think the damage to the jaw, the damage to the hyoid bone, in connection with the blood on the boots, and then later with I fired 2 shots to try and attract attention, I don't know, maybe I've seen too much death, but it all started coming together. All I can say is there's a lot of roads leading to Rome. Is it the only city in the country? No. But there comes a time where if you look at what's before you objectively and apply the right criteria to it, you can come up with some relatively dramatic findings. And in this case, I think there's a lot of people think there's enough. Unfortunately, the DPP don't. And so, my mind, look, I've actually had to give up thinking about whether people have done it or not. I was losing too much sleep. All I know is 3 went in and 1 came out. And now we have found one who's, is a declared homicide. A lot of people might say it's simplistic and you're trying to fit things to make things fit. Have you heard of the term Occam's razor? Yeah, look, Occam's razor is a term that we use often in science where if you have multiple pathways to the same result, generally the simplest pathway is the right one. So how did that damage to the jaw occur? Because there's no corresponding fractures, like it wasn't though the jaw was blown into 2 or whatever, there was a hole. So one of the scenarios is he was shot and the projectile .22 size, which about the same size as the hole, caused that damage. Another stream is that it was damage caused as he fell down the mine shaft. So he's got a bump along the mine shaft and then strike an area of the mine shaft that is small enough and hard enough that it's just going to punch a hole there but cause no other fractures. So for me, if you apply Occam's razor, the shooting is the most simplest one. Could it be something else? Absolutely. But that's the most simplest path.
I believe the police early on did actually want to charge Milne. So maybe talk us through that and then maybe why that didn't happen.
One of the lead detectives felt there was enough to charge Mr Milne with the death of Ray. What happened, interestingly, what happened was they referred it to the DPP. Now, what that means is in a normal situation, the police will decide there's enough evidence and they'll just arrest and charge the person. But in certain cases, and there's certain criteria, they will often get the advice of the DPP. Now, after the coroner's inquiry, they again went back to the DPP, I believe, and the result was not enough to prove beyond reasonable doubt. And unfortunately, that's where it sits. I remember having a conversation with Dave the other day where he was quite frustrated with some submissions that had gone in, and what happened was he got stuck in the politics of a previous DPP who is now a Supreme Court judge has said there's nothing to see here. They've asked the new DPP, who wants to be a judge, what do you reckon? And he said, well, without additional evidence, I can't reopen it. Now that 2 things there. One is common sense, that if there's nothing new, why do I second guess that other person? And secondly, if I decide to second guess that other person with nothing new, I'm basically saying they didn't know what they were doing. And as I said to Dave, I said, you've got stuck in the politics here of a DPP wanting to be a judge, and he actually can't touch your case. Because unless you're going to throw new evidence at him, he's got to compete with the fact that a DPP that is now a judge has looked at it and said there's nothing there. And that's the politics of life. Now, also, what we have to look into this is the potential of police not having done a very good job. A fair bit of criticism, those sort of things. So I think the check with the DPP was probably so that later down the track, when the question was, well, why did you charge him? Well, the DPP told us to. That gets them out of jail. There's lessons on so many levels, it's difficult to know where to start. One of them is, I guess, where possible, providing the same level of support for investigations in rural Western Australia as we get in the city, and have people out there that know what they're doing. For example, we would post people out of the forensic division when a spot became available to places like Kununurra and Broome and South Headland. And what you got to remember is these guys are a commercial plane ride away or 4 days in a car from city specialists. And we would send people that wanted to go as opposed to those best skilled to go. And so I think having the right people in the right place at the right time very, very early And you know, you got to apologise to the boss that you incurred some overtime and spent some travel allowance, but we've confirmed 100% it's just a missing person. That's way better than 6 months later going, okay, this is a homicide. But having said that, I find police culture is very slow to remember lessons learned, particularly when they cost money. Police don't like fact checkers. I'm a fact checker now, and they don't like me. But that's just because culturally police are used to having no one question what they're doing, or not even question, but saying, well, prove it. If this is what you think, prove it, because that's your job. If you want to examine a hypothesis, and the hypothesis here is that smell comes from that dead kangaroo, you need to test your hypothesis. For example, pull the kangaroo away and see whether the mouth of the mine shaft still smells. You know, very, very simple experiment, not done, and a huge mistake. To automatically attribute it to the kangaroo and not doing any follow-up was a huge mistake. And what gets me about that is the explanation given at the time to the more senior officers was accepted. And it's rubbish.
They let the last known person to see Ray and Jennie alive camp out in a cordoned off area to the rest of the public.
Beggars belief. Oh, look, I think that just boiled down to the naivety of the officers that were there. A lack of dealing with multiple instances of complex investigations, a lack of foresight, a lack of what could happen. You know, when you get tasked with examining a homicide, you have a million things running through your head, or you should. Myself, I'd cut, 4x6 whiteboards to scenes and just be writing dot points as soon as I thought of them, you know. I just not enough thought went into that decision and the possible ramifications. But again, I'd been looking at homicides for a long time, and the 3 in 1 out straight away, it's like if there's a surviving spouse in a domestic homicide, they're the first person you have a look at. So it's very difficult to understand why that decision was made. At the end of the day, would it be fatal to an investigation? I'm not so sure, because aside from him maybe taking things, like DNA and fingerprints and that won't be that big a deal because we know who. It's the context of where they might be found that could be important, or him, sitting there and thinking, oh wow, that box of ammunition, I forgot to take it out of my pocket. So, changes things. So that's difficult to understand.
Around that time, one of the locals found some bedding, I don't know if you've heard of this, with a bullet hole in it and blood on it. He reported it to the Mount Magnet police. They came and grabbed it and they heard nothing.
There's every chance that when the new officer in charge of that police station comes in whenever and does an audit of evidence on hand in a back shed somewhere, there's a mattress and all the time.
Yeah. And do you think the WA police culture, I mean, you're not in it now, but generally is it a healthy culture, or do you feel like there's a lot of work to be done there?
I think there's a lot of work to be done. I have, as I said, I've been fortunate to teach all around the world, examine cases all around the world, and the culture is, that type of police culture is pervasive across the world. The worst thing you can do to garner police support is tell them they've done something wrong, because the law enforcement culture is to just attack back and pull the shutters down. Oh, here's a question for you. When have you seen a police commissioner or a very high-ranked police officer get on the news and say, we're sorry, we screwed it up?
I never have.
There you go. The levels of arrogance is it's off the charts. The best case scenario would be that we find Jennie and that something occurs in the investigation that allows for the arrest and conviction of Mr Milne if he's the offender, and that the families can put the second person to bed and grieve. Yeah. Ideally, that would be it.
What wisdom would you pass on to people in this situation who've had a family member go missing? What are some practical bits of advice you might give them in the early days of navigating this wild, what Dave's referred to as a broken roller coaster of up and downs? Like, any wisdom or thoughts for family who are going through these sorts of...
I think one of the things that I've developed primarily over the last 10 years of particularly teaching, because I teach about logic and reasoning and decision making and how that impacts on forensic investigations. And people can come to early conclusions. People can base their behaviour on assumptions that may be wrong. So, for example, an assumption that may be wrong is that a person might go, well, the police are involved, so surely they're interested and they'll do the best possible job. Well, that just doesn't happen. It does happen in some cases, but there's always cases where it doesn't happen. And just don't give up. I think every family, I'm a dad myself, you know, any of my family went missing, I'd want to grieve over them. And so for me it would be, yeah, don't ever give up. The other thing is there's people like the Rick Heatons of the world out there. There's people like me out there. Like an example of that was, and this came about with my friendship with Dave and also feeling a bit of guilt about how the police service had treated him. I remember having a beer with him once and he was saying that he was getting beaten up a bit in the meetings with the police, and so I offered, I'll come with you, because I'll tell them to fuck off and do their job. And everybody that he's been meeting with, I know him by name. One of the family support officers is a very good friend of mine. So yeah, I think it's just, don't speculate too wildly and talk to people even external to the police service who may be able to help. I've actually suggested to Dave that he consider a private prosecution because under our criminal code, you can bring your own prosecution against someone. The burden of proof, the O.J. Simpson thing. You know how he was acquitted, right? The family then brought a civil prosecution, which was successful, and they were rewarded with, $50 million or something. Well, there's the capacity to do that here, just going to cost a lot of money. And I've recommended that to Dave. I said, mate, if you win Lotto, bring your own prosecution. Or a collective GoFundMe, whatever. The only thing that they could argue is that he would get no right to a fair trial in West Australia because it's been too public. But you can shift trials. Or you can bring in a judge from another jurisdiction and go judge alone. Don't worry about a jury. It's not out of the realms of possibility. But the other thing is the burden of proof is different. Okay, in a criminal court it's beyond reasonable doubt. In a civil court it's on the balance of probabilities, which is 51%.
Really?
Absolutely.
Fascinating.
Yep. Now that'd be a doco.
In future episodes of Some Kind of Closure, we'll continue to explore the key details of Ray and Jennie's final trip, speaking with family members, experts, and others closely connected to the case. If you or anyone you know has information about this case, you can contact us via our Facebook page, The Man in the Hole. As the series unfolds, we're hopeful that more people will come forward with insights that could help piece together a clearer picture and ultimately bring the families some kind of closure and hopefully justice. It's also important to note that a $2 million reward is currently being offered for information leading to a conviction in this case. This is one of the largest rewards in Australian history, offering a powerful incentive for anyone with knowledge to come forward. If you have any information related to this case, please contact Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000. Even the smallest details could make a huge difference. That number again, 1800 333 000. We acknowledge the Badimaya people of the Yamaji Nation as the traditional custodians of the lands where this episode was recorded. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise their enduring connection to this unique and beautiful place. Thank you for listening to Some Kind of Closure. If you found this episode valuable, please consider subscribing and leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It's a quick, free way to support the show, and it really helps us reach more people. This is a fully independent production. If you'd like to support the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Just get in touch via our Facebook page. Lastly, we acknowledge the presumption of innocence for all individuals discussed in this series. Any opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the producers. Thanks again for listening.
We've only got one side of the story.
They were just everyday people.
We find Jenny, we will find out what happened.
And the truth will prevail.